Today I want to discuss the issue of what's called, sometimes people call languaging in Buddhism. In other words, using words like I and me and mine and you and yours, all these kinds of words, or not. By the way, if you're new to this channel and interested in living a wiser and a kinder and a calmer life, consider subscribing to this channel and click the bell down below if you want to receive notifications when I come out with new videos. And indeed, one of the issues here about kindness and so on is this feeling that separating between an I and a you is sort of, in a way, subtly unkind or reveals problems that we might have or problems that might come up. Many of us will be familiar with the fact that Buddhism in general, early Buddhism as well, has this notion of non-self. This idea that when we attend to the features of our perceptions, of our perceptual world, the world that surrounds us, we don't see a self there. We see experiences coming and going. We see ideas and thoughts and feelings and desires coming and going, but we don't see a self. Now, I've done any number of videos on this topic. If you're not familiar with this, I'll leave a link to a playlist of these videos down below. And also, it's good to keep in mind that Buddha is not the only person who noticed this. The 18th century philosopher, Western philosopher, Scottish philosopher David Hume said something very similar, that when you attend to the inner phenomena of life, the way we see the world, we don't find a self. The difference is that the Buddha went a little bit farther than Hume in saying that if we really come to know this aspect of non-self, if we really begin to dissociate ourselves from this idea of an internal permanent ego underneath everything, that we can therefore give up greed and hatred, that we can become enlightened. So that there's a path involved here. So anyway, that's the background. Now, some people nowadays will sort of take this and run with it. And in particular, they'll say that since there isn't a permanent ego or self, that we should essentially stop using, or consider anyway, not using words like I or me or you. That therefore we can sort of clean up language. And sometimes you'll hear this in Dharma talks, and sometimes even I'll talk this way. And one idea is that instead of saying something like, I'm thinking this right now, or I'm having this thought right now, you might say, this thought is arising in the mind. Or instead of saying to yourself, my knee hurts while you're sitting in meditation, you may say to yourself, a pain is arising in this knee. Now, this way of speaking has its benefits. For one, it can help us to become a little bit more objective about what we're feeling, because we're no longer framing it in terms that involve a self. We're not thinking of the thoughts as my thoughts, which, if we think of them as my thoughts, we're liable to tend to cling to them and to take them perhaps too seriously. As it's said, you don't want to believe everything you think, right? So one way to do that is to simply eliminate these I's and me's and mine's. Or the other way of looking at it as well is to eliminate the you, or the they, or he or she. So you might, instead of saying, she took my slice of pie, you can say, there is a slice of pie going away experience over there. This, again, dissociates the pie going away from it having been done by a particular person. And again, if we frame it like that, it might perhaps be less prone to make us angry, because we won't be thinking of things in personal terms. So, these do have their benefits, as I say, but they also seem kind of convoluted and wordy, and we might wonder to ourselves, are we really going to be able to keep this up over any period of time? It might work, a couple of times in a Dharma talk, or if you're sitting in meditation, but do we really need to do this in all of our lives? It, again, seems kind of difficult, and you begin to wonder if it's really possible. And one way we can find an answer to this question is to look to the early texts, to see what, if anything, the Buddha had to say. Now, to be clear, the Buddha, he had a lot of things to say. There's thousands of pages of sutras or suttas in the early tradition. I have books of them back there. So we can find a lot. But he did not, of course, speak about everything. And, we can, in some subjects, we can perhaps look to the early texts and try to extrapolate from them in ways to understand what he might have said about Facebook or something. But actually, in this case, the case of reworking language so as to eliminate these terms, interestingly, the Buddha actually did have something to say. He actually did propose this as a question and give an answer to it. So the Buddha asks, when a mendicant is enlightened, would they say, I speak, or even they speak to me? And then he turns and answers it. When a mendicant is enlightened, they would say, I speak, and also they speak to me. Skillful, understanding the world's conventions, they'd use these terms as no more than expressions. So the Buddha's answer here is actually quite plain and simple. That is, that we don't need to worry too much about tying ourselves up in knots in order to speak some idealized language. Using the idealized language or, eliminating words such as I or me or you, that might be useful in certain limited circumstances, but what the Buddha says is that even an enlightened person is not going to leave these words out of their dialogue. On the other hand, he does say that what it is to be enlightened, part of what that is to understand what the words really mean and what they don't mean. That is, that they might have connotations which are incorrect, but we can leave those aside. So in the same way that, one of the very famous early parables or similes is the simile of the chariot, that the self is like a chariot. In the same way that a chariot is made up of a bunch of parts that are put together in a certain way, we don't say that there's a chariot above and beyond the parts put together, or we could say a car. A car is just a bunch of parts put together. When we talk about chariots or cars, we understand that. We don't think that there's, that once you take all the wheels and stuff apart of the engine, that there's some car, that's floating around the room that we need to, put in a basket somewhere. We understand that. And so the Buddha is saying that the enlightened person uses language in the similar way, that they understand that they may have connotations that other people misunderstand, but that they don't misunderstand. We should also keep in mind, however, that the Buddha never really argued that there was no self. He had a bit of a subtler kind of philosophy here, a subtler kind of approach, which is one that I've termed non-self. And I did an earlier video on this very topic of whether the Buddha really said that there was literally no self, and I'll leave a link to it up on the screen here in case you haven't seen it. If you're getting something out of these videos of mine, consider taking a look over at my Patreon page, which is linked down below, and see if you want to join us and help out. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you on the next video, and meanwhile, all of you, be well.